Right. Mark, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to echo the Mayor's opening comments, welcome to everyone that's joined us this afternoon for the first annual plan public workshop. So if I could just ask Fiona to load the slides. We will take you through a presentation, and the presentation is divided into three main parts. And I was just thinking a little bit about what would be the best way to capture any feedback or comments that you have. So next slide, please, Fiona. So in essence, the three parts we're going to. It's really the third part that I think is where we'll take a pause for questions. So first of all, I'm flanked today by Joe Bryan, the Corporate Reporting Planning Manager, as well as Ian Georgeson, the Chief Financial Officer. So between the three of us, we will step you through this workshop presentation. And I'm also supported by my group managers that may be called upon to provide a bit more context. But in essence, we'll take you through just a very quick recap of what we've actually included in the long-term plan. We will then step you through the where year two of the long-term plan is. So the draft budget for year 2022-23. We'll take you through that. We will then, what none of you have seen this, but following our briefing in December last year, we did ask for elected members to send through any reflections that they had after the briefing. So we will be tabling for the first time some feedback that we've had from the councillors, and then we'll be opening up the floor and discussing that with you. And I'm sure many of you have got many other reflections that you'd like to table as well. So I think in terms of stopping for questions, I'd like to get you through the recap of the long-term plan, take you through the draft budgets where they are to date, because there's not much change from the long-term plan budget anyway. And it's really about stepping slowly and calmly through the thoughts that you've had since Christmas about what potentially is not in the budgets. We need to get a steer of what officers need to go away with and rework and bring back for our next workshop. So I'll pause you and we'll open it up for questions, because you might just want us to explain something. But we do have a long session today. We are scheduled to finish at 5. I am very mindful that councillors have had an extremely long day today. So if we can get you through this, we can get the clear steer that we need. If we can get that done well before 5, I think that's probably positive for everyone. But at the same time, we certainly won't rush you, and we want you to have the time that you need to ask as many questions as you need to. So moving on to the next slide, please.
And through you, Mr. Chair, this is a slide just reminding us about what was in our long-term plan and our strategic direction. So just going over it for you, obviously investing in growth and resilience with a focus on housing, infrastructure, growth, mindful that we've got our growth strategy being considered for adoption later this month, acting on climate change, and then we have 4 big key decisions that we agreed to follow through on around our role in housing, the Pākākūreki seawall, setting up the CCO, and exploring our role in the airport. And just to note that we're not proposing any changes to these and our strategic direction as a whole. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Joe, and good afternoon, everybody. So this slide and the next 3 just provide a very brief recap of LTP from a financial perspective. So as displayed on this slide, we've got a significantly increased CapEx program over the life of the plan, 73 million in the current year, 79 and 72 in years 2 and 3. Operating spendings noted there at 96 million this year, rising to 109 in year 3. Net borrowings forecast to reach 210% of total operating income by June 22, the end of year 1, and then from there rising to 255% by the end of the 3rd year, and that's driven by that increased CapEx spending. The rates income current year 77 million, rising to 92 million by year 3, and importantly, embedded in those figures were an average rates increase in the current year of 7.79, 8% in year 2, and 7.9% in year 3. Next slide, please. So these next 3 slides just recap at a very high level the key projects that are included in the plan. This first slide is in the infrastructure area, CapEx programs. The blue dots in the middle just indicate the years in which we expect to be active on these projects, and then out to the right we've noted the budgets for the first 3 years, and then also the budgets included over the life of the plan for those particular items. And so just pick, I won't read through them all, but just the key items that you'll be familiar with: the Link Road, the Paikokariki seawall, and significant investment across our 3 waters area, all 3 areas: stormwater, drinking water, and wastewater, all significant areas of investment. Next slide, please. Community services area, again, CapEx projects. So here we've got Te Urahi, development of Aotearoa Park, the Waikanai Library, and the Mahara Gallery. Next slide. And these are our non-CapEx projects, if you like, so our wider work programs, and there's a lot on this slide, but just working through them: implementing our climate emergency action framework, continuing our emissions reduction program, supporting increased capacity within iwi to work with the council, continuing to support our district's recovery from COVID-19, implementing the economic development strategy, setting up a CCO which could be used for future activities, exploring whether council may have a role to play in the airport, supporting and enabling increased supply and development of housing, implementing the district growth strategy, and reviewing our district plan. Next slide, please. Over to you, Mark. You there, Mark?
Thanks, Ian. I'm now unmuted. So look, this slide just covers a little bit of legal background, as well as lightly touching on what's in, what's out. So as many of you know, that you know, in terms of legislation, with everything being equal, so in other words, nothing changing due to COVID, the council must adopt an annual plan for 22-23 by the 30th of June this year, as it becomes operational from the 1st of July. The budgets that Ian will take you through is largely as per what we plan to do in year 2 of the long-term plan. We haven't changed any of the outcomes, any of the major service levels, or any of the major works programs, which Ian and Joe have just taken you through. However, as we always do, the reason why we get the opportunity, we set a long-term plan, and then we actually then each year of the long-term plan, we have an opportunity to refresh the budgets and then adopt an annual plan, because things do change. Sometimes there's unforeseen cost drivers that we need to include in our budgets, or at least table with you for your consideration. So we have made some small changes to the budgets, as you've heard from Sean a little bit earlier. In terms of the capital works program, there are supply constraints. There are certainly cost increases to materials as well as labour. So we have factored in some rephasing of the capital work program from the current year to next year, and that has a flow-on effect, because it does impact on borrowings and depreciation. We've also had a look at with the government announcement that we are with the Three Waters reform. We have actually made. We are proposing to make some changes to the closed water account, which Ian will take you through that a little bit later. There are increased demands on the council, particularly in the consenting activity, as well as you know, we have got huge capital work program ahead of us for years 1, 2, and 3, which do require some resource. So we need more resource than what we've got. So we've made adjustments to our budgets to reflect that. We're doing more. COVID is becoming more intense, and so we need to communicate and engage with our community a lot more. So we need more resourcing for that. And just like every other business in New Zealand, we're at the mercy of the market. It is an employees market. People are able to step around, jump around, and start to earn considerably more in roles in the likes of Wellington City. So we've had to have a look at our budgeted remuneration levels to retain staff and to recruit staff, and we've had to make some changes there. So we've increased our budgets for staff remuneration as we simply have to, because we do need to replace staff that have left for various reasons, and we need to be an attractive employer, and we need to keep our staff too. So we haven't made too many adjustments or very little allowance for the government's change agenda. So we haven't factored in any huge changes for the Three Waters. You'll recall, in terms of when we did the long-term plan, we were told by the Office of the Auditor General that the long-term plan must assume that we retain those assets. And you've just heard from Ian that we're actually planning to invest quite heavily in our Three Waters infrastructure. So no changes there. We haven't made any specific budget adjustments for changes to the RMA or the Future for Local Government review or the housing bill. In terms of COVID, we have not, and I stress, we haven't included any new money to respond to or recover from COVID. Our position is it's a changing target all the time. There's so much uncertainty, and we haven't included new money to put a burden on the ratepayer now. Our position, or our proposed position at this stage, is we'll respond to COVID as and when we need to by reprioritising our budgets. We don't want to add unnecessary burden onto our ratepayers today. We do have recruitment and retention challenges. As I said before, we've made some small changes to the overall budget for remuneration, but there's a lot more that we could do, but we simply can't afford to do that. Recently, you would have seen headline inflation. CPI is hitting 5.9%. And as many of you know, that CPI and the inflation for council's activities are completely different. They're different baskets. But nevertheless, we are facing huge increase in costs. But at this stage, we certainly haven't increased our inflation that we've included in our budgets to the level of 5.9%. Again, we're going to have to shrink to fit. We every year with our annual, we're audited annually, and we have to produce an annual report. And in terms of our balance sheet, we have to reflect the fair value of our assets. For those of you that have been around the table for a long time, you'll remember that we transitioned from an asset revaluation program that was done every 3 years to annually. And the impact of going annually actually resulted in lots of costs. It absorbed lots of staff working with valuers, and ultimately just resulted in increased or uplift to the value of our assets and very high depreciation. So we took a deep look at our methodology, and we've decided to just claw back and not revalue our assets every single year, but just claw back our strategic assets to be revalued every 2 years. Now, our water assets aren't due to be revalued for the current financial year, but with the Three Waters reform, and speaking with our auditors, we will not be able to get through this year's audit without actually having our assets, our Three Waters assets, independently valued. So we haven't budgeted for that. We do need to have those assets revalued so we can absorb those costs. But what we're expecting is expecting quite a huge uplift in the value of those assets, because the market rates to do that work, as we know, is going sky high. We know that the materials and the cost of labour is going up, and that translates to the market rate for replacing pipes, etc., etc. So the asset values are absolutely certain to go up, and there will be significant depreciation over and above what we've budgeted for. But with the Three Waters reform and the announcement that those assets have been transferred to another entity, at this stage, we're not proposing to increase our rates funded budget to cover that additional depreciation. And we also know that, just like everyone, we are also facing increased energy costs. And at this stage, we factored in, our budgets factor in some increase, but well below what may eventually result. Thank you. Next slide.
Okay, and it's back to me. So this diagram compares the proposed rates increase for year 2 of the LTP on the left-hand side, the 8%, alongside what we're now proposing through this workshop at 7.7. And it provides a breakdown at a high level of the key components that make up the increase. Now, the following slides will provide quite a lot more detail underneath this, but in summary, you can see on the left-hand, on the 8% LTP position, the main drivers there, working from the bottom of the stack upwards, were depreciation and interest are the bottom 2 blocks, again driven by increased CapEx program and depreciation and interest that flows through from that. Then the 1.3% in the centre was unfunded depreciation, so the LTP assumed we'd continue to close that gap by a further $1 million in the coming year, which equated to 1.3%. Inflation, which Mark's just been talking about, we adopted 2% in the LTP, and then other increases were 1.4%, which gave us our full 8%. And on the right-hand side, as I say, I'll take you through a bit more detail in following slides, but in summary, the depreciation and interest we expect to be lower because we know we're not going to achieve our CapEx spend in this year particularly, and the impact of CapEx flows through in the year following as projects complete. So it's the CapEx outturn in the current year is the one that's most relevant to the costs that will hit us next year, and we expect those to be lower. Inflation, we've left at 2%. Mark mentioned that. Our approach is every year Burl issue indices for local governments or to assist local government and through their planning processes, and we have traditionally adopted their view, and we've done that again. Their view is actually 2% for the coming year, so consistent with what we had in the LTP, and that's what we've pitched our numbers on. But I guess as Mark has just noted, we are all a little bit concerned about that given what's happening out in the economy. So we think there's a bit of risk around that, but nonetheless, 2% is where we've pitched it. And then other increases, and in particular additional resourcing bids to deal with increased demand, make up 3.6%. So that gets us to our 7.7. Next slide, please. So at the headline, before I dive into the detail, just at the headline level, we thought it would be useful just to see what's happening around councils in our region. And so you can see those figures there. Right-hand side is what the LTP contained for the various councils, and the indicative column is where it's available, indicatively what is being proposed for each of those councils, and they're all at various stages of the process. But what it's, in summary, it ranges from Hutch, you can see at 5.9% at the low end, through to Greater Wellington, who are in the 12 to 13%. But most of the councils fit within a band of sort of 6 to 9%, which is where we sit also. Next slide, please. Right, so this is the more granular view of the moving parts that get us from the LTP 8% to the 7.7%. And I'll just step across this left to right. There are further slides following around some of these items just to provide a little more detail again. But in summary, I'll just work across that diagram. So we start at 8% per the LTP. The first item, if you just move across the graph left to right, growth. So we assumed 1% in the LTP. Currently, we think that we pulled the picture together just before Christmas, and it looked like we might be slightly above that, perhaps 1.1. And so to the extent that we are above the LTP assumption, that has the effect of reducing the increase for existing ratepayers. The next two items, depreciation and interest. As I say, we know we're not going to get to our $73 million budget this year, and to the extent that we come below it, we will have reduced depreciation and interest flowing through. And we think that on the figures that we've included in this pack, we've assumed a $55 million CapEx outturn for this year, which would flow through to approximately 1% of depreciation and 0.2 on interest. And this is an area we're going to be doing further work on between now and the next workshop on the 24th. Moving further to the right, we've then got a couple of movements that relate to remuneration. So again, as Mark touched on, we're experiencing, I think, like most organisations, a lot of pressure on our staff now in terms of recruitment and retention. It's a very competitive market. And so what we're proposing, firstly, the remuneration increase there of an increase of 1.6%. What that reflects is the LTP had a 1.5% remuneration increase included in each of the years. For the current year remuneration round, the final cost came in closer to 4%, 3.5%, 4%, and that is a permanent increase in cost that will flow through into next year. And in addition to that, we're proposing that next year's allowance be increased from 1.5, which was the LTP allowance, to 3%. I'm sorry, it's slightly confusing because I'm talking about remuneration increases there as opposed to rates increases. But the net effect of those two items added together equates to a rates increase of 1.6%. Next item goes the other way as a saving. Sorry, Fiona. Yep, thanks. The next item is a saving of approximately the same value, 1.7%, which relates to vacancies. And so the LTP did not include any allowance next year for the reality that there is always a level of churn going on within our staff. And so somebody resigns, it takes on average 3 months to work through the process of advertising, interviewing, recruiting, notice periods, etc. And so that adjustment simply reflects the fact that at 15% turnover and allowing 3 months, beg your pardon, to fill a role, there is a saving that we will achieve that equates to around about a 1.7%. So it just reflects the reality that we know we don't need to budget for 100% occupancy of our staff establishment, because it just won't happen. The next two items relate to the water reforms. So we've got firstly unfunded depreciation. As you'll know, we've been working for some years to close the unfunded depreciation gap, and the LTP assumed current year the gap is 2.5 million. LTP assumed would bring that down by a further million to 1.5 in the coming year. And that the reason for that is to avoid long-term accumulation of debt, basically, because to the extent that you've got a gap, you are debt funding your operating activities and your debt just continues to grow and grow, which in the long term is a problem. Given the reforms and the fact that assets are going to transfer in 2 years' time, we think there's an option there to hold the gap at the current level and not reduce it further. We then also think, in relation to the water account, there is some credit in there that can be released. So we've tracked the water account, the revenues and costs associated with provision of water. We've tracked since the introduction of water meters. And as in the last complete year, which was June 2021, there was a net surplus on that account of just over 1.1 million. And we feel it's reasonable to release that back and give the benefit of that back to current ratepayers. And then finally, there's an increase of 3.7%, which is around additional resourcing bids in response to growth and demand. And so the addition of all of that lot, the pluses and minuses, takes you to the 7.7% that we're proposing. Next slide, please. So a few slides that just give you a little bit more detail under some of these numbers. The growth, this is a schedule as at early December of subdivision activity, I suppose, that we've got visibility of at varying stages of the process. So it ranges from the top of table items that are subdivisions that are nearing completion and working with us towards section 224 completion, down to lower down in the table, the pre-RC, pre-resource consent projects that are just that. They're very much at concept stage, so probably still some way away. In total, you can see there's just over 3,000 odd lots that we have an awareness of. So that's something like 12%, probably to land over the next 4 to 5 years. But what's important in terms of this rate set for next year is how much of it completes before 30 June and therefore comes into our rates calculation for the new year. And we think the number for that is the top one, approximately 265 or 1.1%. This is another area that we'll be looking at and refreshing ahead of the next workshop. But I know it hasn't changed a great deal since these figures were put together. Next slide, please. CapEx. So I've mentioned this really, but the top line just shows the LTP numbers, 73, 79, 72. And again, this was a position that was worked up before the December briefing. And at that point, there were specific changes that, if we just focus on the 21-22 year, specific changes of 13 million that we were aware of. But in addition to that, the unallocated changes is really an executive judgment around our ability to deliver, because notwithstanding there are a lot of our projects that where the managers are still forecasting will deliver, we know we're going to have challenges around supply, etc. And so at that point, the judgment was a figure around 55 million for this year, is approximately where it will land, and that's the figure that we've factored into all of the calcs that we're putting to you today. This is still a work in progress, and we will be updating this for the next briefing. Next slide. Unfunded depreciation. Again, I've really covered this off, but the LTP assumed we would reduce the gap by $1 million. We're saying, given the water reforms, there's a choice not to do that. And if you take that option, that will add back $1 million. Next slide. This just supports that point I made around the unfunded depreciation. So it shows the orange bars that just continue growing into out years simply demonstrate if you don't close the gap, then the debt that you're accumulating as a result of the unfunded depreciation just grows forever, basically, which is not great. However, with the Three Waters transitions coming, that becomes less relevant, I guess, which is why we think this is an option. Next slide. It's just a summary of the water account surplus over recent years. So you can see the last complete year was the 2021 year, and that year we ended with the balance of the water account at 1.1 million. And whilst we're forecasting actually to make a further surplus this year, we're not wanting to commit that at this point because there's a level of uncertainty around that, given that we're only just over halfway through the year. So we're proposing releasing the June 21 figure, essentially of $1 million. Next slide, please. And Mark, I think this is back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So this slide just goes into a little bit more detail, sort of details a little bit more what these additional cost pressures are. So additional cost pressures means these are costs that we have not included in the long-term plan budget for 22-23. So this is over and above. So as you've already seen, that equates to $2.9 million, which is 3.7%, and it's been themed into 5 themes. So the bulk of it actually relates to responding to growth, which in essence is what our LTP is all about. We have included some additional money to respond to climate change, as well as community partnerships. And of course, we have put in some money for COVID response and recovery, albeit a very small amount. And then some very, very small rats and mice that equate to $55,000. So I'll take you through that in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So responding to growth. So in essence, it's the need to bring in more resources so that we can deliver on the long-term plan in a nutshell. So we would need some more resourcing to work through the review of the town centres plan. The Wellington Regional Growth Framework has a project for the Kapiti Harawhenua, and there's no budget for year 2 and 3. So we need to make sure that there is a sufficient budget to complete that project. We do want to increase the iwi representation of our 3 iwis around the table at our council and committee meetings. So there's some money for that. And in terms of the rest of it is really, we have signalled that we need to put some more resource into our PMO. We have a large, even at $55 million, that is a very large program of work in terms of CapEx projects, larger than what this council has ever done before. We have got more demand on our consenting team, so we need to resource that accordingly. There is a need to engage and communicate more with our community, so there is certainly a need for that, as well as in our strategy, growth and recovery area. We need some more resourcing to get behind developing council's strategies. In terms of responding to climate change, there's a budget has been proposed for a permanent FTE, as well as another position on a fixed term contract. That's to provide administrative support to the coastal adaptation team, as well as a climate change educator. Working down the slide to community partnerships, we want to increase the resource for our front of house library team, as well as increase resources for our Maori services and digital inclusion programming. In Otaki, the DIA has very kindly provided some funding for the iwi partnerships team to work through making it a bilingual town, but we need some budget to make that happen. And for translation costs, we need to develop the Maori economic development and wellbeing strategy. And then the overdue library loan changes removed. I'll talk to that when we hit the fees and charges. The COVID response and recovery, as I said, we will respond to that as best we can. We haven't placed a huge burden on our ratepayers, anticipating what we might need to spend to do that. But we have actually focused on recovery, and we've put a small amount of money in for business/investment attraction incentive fund. And as with everybody else, we need to do more deep cleaning. We need more PPE gear to keep both our staff safe as well as our community. And the $55,000, that's just rats and mice really across the whole council. So all of that equates to $2.86 million, which is 3.7%. And all of this is new money that staff and GMs have worked through line by line. We've gone through the detail, and these are the things that we simply do need to deliver on the long-term plan, to achieve the outcomes that are set in that long-term plan, and to not reduce the service levels that we've signed up to do. Next slide, please. So this is one of our favourite slides for those of you that have been around the table a few years. It's a financial strategy with our 3 levers: rates, debts, and CapEx. So this is a snapshot of where we're at. So starting at the top, rates. So the target range, in terms of financial strategy, the target range for our rates, or the lower and upper limit, is between 3 and 9%. The annual plan is the draft budgets that we're presenting you today has an average rates increase next year of 7.7%, which is less than the long-term plan published rates increase of 8%. So that's certainly going in the right direction. So that's a tick. Moving around clockwise down to debt, we have an upper limit in the financial strategy that debt cannot exceed 280% of total operating income. The annual plan is currently positioning that at 220 million, which is 204%, so well below 280 and well below what we've published or what we plan to be doing in the long-term plan of 220. And that's because, as you've heard from Sean Mellon as well as Ian Georgeson, there are delays to the capital works program. So that has a direct impact on the amount of money that we need to borrow. And then lastly, in terms of CapEx, the target range is $30 to $80 million of delivered capital works per annum. And the annual plan currently has 80 million against the long-term plan of 79. So just a tickle over, but as you've heard already, we are likely to come back to the next workshop, which is scheduled for the 24th of February, as the team are working through that. As we obviously can't finish everything we plan to do this year, that'll then get deferred to next year. We'll then look at next year's program, and we'll need to push some stuff out. So it takes a lot of work to get through that. So the team will be ready to present that when we come back on the 24th. Next slide, please. So fees and charges. So, so in terms of our starting position, what we do with our fees and charges is that we automatically inflate our fees and charges by BERL LGCI, which is the Local Government Cost Index. So that's a composite inflation number which takes into account all the different goods and services that go into the basket of council operations. So automatically we inflate that by 2.4%. And then we go through all those fees and charges, and we report to you any fees and charges that have increases over and above 2.4%. And I'll take you through that on the next few slides. With fees and charges have a direct correlation to the amount of rates revenue that we require, because actually what we do is we set out what we plan to do and what that's going to cost. And then one of the revenue streams is fees and charges. And so the sort of balancing number would be rates revenue after our capital contributions. So if you increase fees and charges, then we have less reliance on rates, but then vice versa. If you reduce fees and charges, we still need a set amount of revenue to cover our cost base. So by reducing fees and charges has the effect of increasing our rates requirement. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's a few fees and charges that are over and above the 2.4%. They're very, very small, and I'll take you through that. So the first one relates to arts and museums. So this is really a rounding difference. This isn't a deliberate higher increase than 2.4%. It's just a rounding difference. The Kapiti Arts Trail fee increases are slightly above the 2.4% due to rounding up. In terms of our building consents, this relates to minor inspections for solid fuel heaters, as well as the issuing the certificate of acceptance for those installations. What we've actually found is that the time taken by council officers to do those inspections and process the certificate of acceptance it just takes longer than what we anticipated to do. So we're not recovering all of our costs. So we do want to recover our costs on that. So we're proposing a 3.7% increase for the inspection fees. And a small change, the application for the certificate of acceptance fee is for the first 2 hours. And then after that, it's per hour that it takes to actually certify that acceptance. In terms of the environmental health, animal management, council has a euthanasia fee. And what the proposal to do is to actually remove the euthanasia fee, but increase the relinquishment fee. So council has never actually raised a fee for euthanasia. The relinquishment fee, in essence, actually does include euthanasia when that's the last possible resort. So the relinquishment fee includes the cost of sustenance, the administration, rehoming, and as I said, if necessary, euthanasia. So given that we've never actually charged euthanasia, we want to simplify this. We want to effectively incorporate one into the other. So the proposal is to maintain a relinquishment fee, but to increase that from $83 to $120. And then just like everything else, in terms of a laboratory, the cost of consumables is going far higher than the 2.4%. So to recover our costs, the fee increase needs to be between 3 to 9%. Next slide, please. In terms of libraries, this is the point that was incorrectly on a previous slide. So the proposal is to actually remove the charge that we have on all overdue items. Apart from that, we're not proposing any real significant changes to any of our fees with the library, but the only exception is that we have library subscription fees for members that reside outside of Kapiti, and the proposal is to increase those subscription fees for those that don't live in Kapiti for 6 and 12 months by between 3.5% to 7%, and that 3.5% to 7% is mainly because of the rounding to the nearest $5. So it's really a mathematical outcome. It makes sense to round it to the nearest $5 to keep it simple. And then in terms of swimming pools, No major changes are proposed to the swimming pool fees for learn to swim, child swim, community service holders, senior citizens, aquafit, hydro slide, etc. But what we do want to do, the team does want to make a small change. So at the moment, there's a fee for small group aquatic programs, which are billed on a 10-week cycle. The 10-week is meant to reflect the terms, and school terms, the duration of school terms are a bit variable. They don't always match 10 weeks. So the team just wants to do a little bit of a realignment, and instead of that fee based on a 10-week interval, it's just going to be simplified to term 1, term 2, term 3, term 4. So that's I think that's just an improvement to how we're billing, because I think it's causing confusion for some of our users of our facilities. Next slide, please. Over to you, Jo.
Thank you, Mark, and through you, Mr. Chair. So we need to make sure that we apply the significance and engagement policy to all of these changes. You'll probably be familiar with it, but just running through the assessment criteria there, we look at strategic assets. The policy does cover all our assets. However, you'll note that we're not proposing any changes to ownership, financial impacts on rates, which have been covered in this presentation, our district strategy, and whether we're consistent with the long-term plan. As I mentioned earlier, our overall strategy is remaining the same. The degree of public interest, monitoring the relationship, and legislative requirements. So we need to look at all of these things together to determine whether we inform or consult going forward. And obviously, water assets, as mentioned earlier, are subject to what's being driven by central government. So next slide, please. So we have some thresholds in the policy that we need to adhere to. As you can see there, if CapEx is more than 18 million, then it would be triggered. If OpEx is more than 5.3 million, it would be triggered. In terms of our debt limits, the net debt to operating revenue needs to be at or below 280%. And as Mark mentioned earlier, we're well below that. The upper limit rates increase for the LTP is 9%. And so obviously, as mentioned before, if the policy is triggered, then we need to move to formal consultation. Next slide, please. So at this point, we don't consider that anything in the current cost pressures would trigger consultation. We have no changes to levels of service and no changes in asset ownership. OpEx increases below the significance threshold, and our rates increases below the LTP planned rate increase of 8%. So we're not proposing additional funding requests also at this stage from community boards, because they had an opportunity for input into the year 2 of the LTP. However, in the following slides, we've picked up on feedback received so far from elected members and community boards, and we'll take you through that. Next slide, please. So this timeline hasn't changed from the December version. You'll note that we've got another workshop planned for February. Towards the end, it'll be the 24th of February. We'll check back in with you. And then in March, we propose to bring to you if either an information document or a consultation document, depending on where you land. We have built into the time frame the ability to manage both those processes through April, and we also have booked a holding place for hearings if need be in May. Moving through to the third workshop, where we will then move to the actual annual plan itself adoption. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jo. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, this is probably a good time to stop and pause and just see whether or not we have any questions or feedback. We've taken you through a number of slides, and what we've tabled with you is the draft budget for year 2, which is sitting at 7.7%, which is below the 8%, which we set out in a long-term plan. And we've done that through various means. We're proposing that we're not changing the outcomes of the long-term plan. We're not changing the service levels. But we have put some new concepts on the table for you to digest and think about. We're saying that we're proposing that we don't close the depreciation funding gap at the rate that we plan to do, and that's largely because that unfunded depreciation relates to the Three Waters infrastructure assets. Those assets have been transferred from 1 July 2024. So we don't believe at this stage that we should be burdening the ratepayers to further close that gap, as we'll be negotiating with central government the debt that's attributed to those assets. The other concept that we've landed with you today is a proposal. There is a surplus sitting in the water account, and what we're proposing is to redistribute that surplus to the benefit of all ratepayers. That's effectively, that has the impact of reducing your rates increase. We are indicating that we believe at the moment that actual growth in our district is going to be slightly higher than what we anticipated in the long-term plan. Not 1%, but we think it could be as high as 1.1%. And that has the impact of actually reducing your rates. And we have also said that we have identified some additional cost pressures of 3.7% or $2.9 million, which is largely related to responding for growth. So we need to resource up in the communication engagement with our community, and we're seeing that absolutely with COVID. But as well as we need to do that with our vast capital works program. We need to upscale in the consenting area. There's huge demand for that. As well as the project management office. We want to put more money into responding to climate change, as well as a little bit more money to try and stimulate investment and business growth to help the district recover from COVID-19. So we have tabled quite a bit, Mr. Mayor, and I'm conscious that we haven't let anyone speak. So I think this is a great time to pause, and then I'll take you through the feedback and the reflections that we've had since December from elected members.
Right. Can I kick it off by asking this question? You touched on the depreciation gap in relation to relieving that because of the possibility of the Three Waters change. What political signal that's giving is that we are engaging in a transition, which effectively means we accept the government's position of reform. So we are preempting any sort of political decision in that stage. So we need to know quite clearly what financial underpinnings and projections we will gain from the government proposal. You see what I'm trying to say?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, that's an excellent point. Look, absolutely, Mr. Mayor. The outstanding in terms of conversation with local government is how and what they're going to pay us for those assets. We have signalled to them the debt book that's attached to those assets, as well as the non-funded depreciation, which has accumulated, which is debt, which is attached to those assets. So look, absolutely. We wish we were in a position where we knew what they were paying and how they were going to pay it. And look, given that the central government, your point is we really are following central government. They have mandated that the Three Waters reform will happen from 1 July 2024. And until such time as we're told otherwise, we have to plan for that. We have to get ready for that. And that's why we put this proposal on the table. We don't feel it's in the ratepayers' best interests to pay another 1% of rates to close that depreciation funding gap, or put a different way, pay 1% to pay down the debt associated with those assets, where we should be actually going to central government and saying the debt that this council has incurred for those assets includes that, and that's what you should be paying us. So
in this particular case, the signal seems to be a tick for the government's proposal because it allows us to do this. They bigger picture here, because what is the bigger picture in terms of, I remember when Ian was giving us the analysis of what it will mean to our finances in terms of our debt and future financial projections. That there are gains to be made by the government proposals. I think that argument has not been made clear. We have the argument that we'll lose the assets, and then that's really bad. And we'll lose democracy, local democracy. But the other side of it hasn't been made clear enough. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that we've got that. My fear is by creep, we'll be making political decisions through our financial processes.
Yeah, really good point, Mr. Mayor. And through you, look, in terms of just going back to your earlier point, so if I think back to the slide that Ian presented a short while ago, where we showed you the debt profile, how the debt profile changes when we close that depreciation funding gap, because the financial strategy of this council is to close that gap very quickly so that we're fully funding our operational expenses, and then to rate fund for surpluses to accelerate the repayment of our debt. Now, if we stayed on that path, the total debt that accumulates for not funding, fully funding depreciation would peak at $56 million. And what that slide further back showed is it'll actually peak at $120 million. And the reality is, by accepting this, we are signalling to local government that we accept the Three Waters reform, that we're being told they're doing it to us. So I'm not sure whether we're in a position to accept or not. We're responding to what they're telling us. The only other point is we're trying to set rates for year 2. Now, if we get to next year and after the central government elections, if there's a change to the thinking about the Three Waters, we have the ability to then bring back to the table, well, this is the position. We haven't fully funded that gap as we planned in year 2. This is the impact that it's had. So now we aren't losing the assets anymore. Something's changed. Do we need to continue to go on the path to close that depreciation funding gap? So we don't lose too much if we respond pretty quickly, if central government makes a bit of a change to what they're saying. But certainly, I don't think anyone's in a position at the moment that's suggesting that they are likely to change their position.
Okay. My second question is, we talk about the water account being a closed account. The measures that you're taking to take the money out to relieve rating pressure for everybody, can that be legally tested? Because we're saying it's a closed account, what does closed account mean?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Look, my absolute understanding is that water is not a closed account. It's not enshrined in the local government or any legislation. It's the way in which this council manages its water. We have a closed account because we transitioned to water meters. We wanted to make sure that we were recovering the total cost of our water. So when we went on to water meters, if we found that the charges that we have set were making profits, then that would then go to the benefit of the ratepayers that were paying for water, so that we would start to level it out. So there is no breach of legislation by repurposing the surplus in the water account. Our auditors won't smack us over the head with a wet newspaper. We won't get reported to. It is just the way in which this council, and very sensibly so, we keep a firm or a bright torch on our water account expenses, what we're recovering by way of water rates, because we transitioned to water meters. And ratepayers want to know, are you overcharging us or undercharging us? So we kept that closed to make sure that the charging regime for the water account was fair and equitable.
Okay. Councillor Holbrook.
Well, you've actually covered the two topics that I was wanting to ask about. I heard another one too, actually, but I was just going to go back to the first one first. The not closing the depreciation gap because of the imminent Three Waters reform program. So there's a kind of variety of ways that you can kind of think of this. So there's reformers coming our way. There's no point in closing the depreciation gap because they're going to be taken off our hands anyway, which is what I understood at the start of today's presentation. Then I kind of got a bit more understanding that it's about if we actually take that debt off, if we repay more of that debt, then we reduce the value of the asset in terms of what we're going to be reimbursed for it. So really, whether or not the Three Waters reform happens, we should be maintaining the value of that asset just in case, really. Even if it, say we repaid the depreciation now and then it does happen, then we're losing revenue, the revenue that we might otherwise get if we maintained that debt level. Have I got that right?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you, Councillor. Look, there's a couple of concepts there. So look, as Ian or Joe took you through what we're planning to do in the long-term plan, significant investment in our Three Waters infrastructure. So absolutely maintaining the asset and doing the upgrades that are needed. So not taking our foot off the accelerator and making sure that the assets are fit for purpose or better. And that's reflected in the budgets that we've got. You were absolutely spot on. What fundamentally, the council of the day around 9 years ago, when they adopted the policy to not fully fund depreciation, was based on infrastructure assets, because our assets were new. They were relatively new, and rate funding the depreciation to enable the maintenance didn't need to occur right at the outset, but you did need to play catch up. So at the end of the useful life of the asset, there was effectively, you had refinanced the maintenance of that asset. But what we're saying to you today is there's two options. We either stay the course of what we're planning to do and charge our ratepayers another $1 million of OPEX, which is over 1%, and continue to close that depreciation funding gap. And then we negotiate. So effectively what we do is the government pays us less. So we're actually putting that burden on the ratepayers now. And we're saying to the government, don't worry, you can pay us less because we've just charged the ratepayers another $1 million. What we want to do is we're desperately trying to set ourselves up to say, well, we need to negotiate. We need to talk to central governments. They have indicated that the payment to council will be based on the debt book, not on the value of the asset. The value of the asset is defined by accounting standards. So what we're saying is, well, let's keep that debt book reflecting what it is, and let's give the benefit to the ratepayers now, just a year, because it's still uncertain. We haven't had any confirmation from them what the formula is, and our fear is it'll be like everything else. They will just tell us it'll be a rate in the dollar X of your debt book. So we just don't feel that we should put that burden on the ratepayer now, where potentially central government could pay that $1 million in our negotiations with them. But it's not impacting the maintenance or the functionality of our assets at all. That's in our capital works program.
Yeah, when I use the word maintenance, I meant maintaining the value, not maintaining the asset. But I think the word potentially you use there is important, because I think Guru has a point. If we go out and say the Three Waters is rolling down, we need to do this now, then that is, yeah, I don't know that we're quite there yet, and I don't know that politically we want to be there either as a council. In fact, we don't know, we haven't had that conversation recently, but we have been pushing back, so yeah, I think it's just being careful about how we communicate that, but it certainly makes sense to me not to be reducing that debt at this time, with the potential of the Three Waters down the track. Now, I did want to touch on the. Oh, did you want to respond? Sorry.
No, please continue.
So I was concerned about the closed account too, because it wasn't just a kind of being fair to ratepayers. There was a concern when we first went down the road of volumetric charging that it was going to be a profit-making exercise and that would, you know, at the time it was more to do with that would then make it attractive to privatization, but there was a resistance to the water account making a profit. You know, I think that needs a little more thought.
Yeah, look, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. I guess that the best way of responding to that is we have held the line. We haven't increased our fixed or variable water charges for 3 years. Since we introduced water meters in 2014, the team have actively been monitoring water consumption. When we come to table with you what we think the water rates need to be, it's based on previous year's consumptions, the seasonality, other factors that we know. So this council has not increased water rates for the last 3 years, and that surplus has really got to where it's got to, and mainly because of underspends in the planned activities in the water account. And right from the outset, the charging advisory group advised the council on what percentage should be fixed, what component should be variable. It was a try and see. It was something completely new for this council, and the close water account was if it transpired that the variable charge and the fixed charge was actually generating a surplus, then it was an easy way of releasing that. So we haven't got to a position where we've got a surplus because we've been overcharging our ratepayers or not estimating properly what water consumption in the district's going to be. We've had no water restrictions in the last 3-4 years in terms of the hot summers. It's simply because the costs of providing potable water, those costs have actually come under, and that's slowly by not increasing the water rates and making some savings and some underspends has put us in the position we have the surplus. And again, our thinking is let's transfer that benefit to the ratepayers, as opposed to saying to central government, well, there's $1.6 million of surplus that you don't have to pay us for. Because the government will turn around and say, well, you're charging, you've actually developed a nice little surplus, we aren't going to pay you for that. So what we want to do is we actually think it's more prudent and a lot more sensible to clear that surplus, reduce rates on the ratepayer, so that when we do actually start talking to the central government, we're on a strong footing. We're just trying to put ourselves in a stronger position and not give them any, any position to deduct what they pay from us. So we might agree they pay us X million less the 1.6. We want to clear that 1.6 out. People have been paying, they've been rated for that. It is theirs, and we should give it back.
Okay, that makes sense. I don't envy the person who's going to have to explain all of this. I mean, so I just wanted to talk about the relinquishment fee increase from 87 to 120. That's quite a lot all at once. I wonder if other councillors would agree that that should be spread over, maybe do a bit now and then look at maybe doing a bit the next year. And also, if we weren't getting any revenue from the euthanasia anyway, then what's the justification for increasing the relinquishment fees? Because it wasn't a real, we're not covering another we're actually getting.
Yeah, look, I don't know whether anyone else, whether Mike or anyone might want to comment, but essentially we're merging two fees into one. We always, when we look at fees and charges over and above inflation, we do look at what our counterparties are doing. So I know that level will be in alignment. And then the costs of relinquishment have gone up as well. Euthanasia costs have gone up. We haven't done much euthanasia, but the sustenance costs have gone up. The costs of rehoming have gone up. And the costs of staff time to look after those animals, particularly on the administration side. So by increasing the cost, whilst it looks like it's a lot in one go, it's actually merging two fees together. We haven't actually raised an invoice for euthanasia. It's always been for relinquishment, which includes euthanasia. And those costs are being set to, again, to recover the costs that we're incurring on the ground and to keep rates at the 7.7% level.
That makes sense. Okay, I'll let somebody else have a go now. Thank you.
Oh, Rob, then Martin.
Sure, thank you. It's been really informative. I just want to note my agreement with what Mark has been saying prior to euthanasia about water. And I think it's just want to differentiate that there. I think it's really prudent. I do, Guru, think that I don't think we'd be sending a signal that we're agreeing with government. We're just playing the game as best we can for our residents. So I don't think we're sending a signal that we're agreeing with the government's proposition when we don't adequately fund that depreciation. I just really, Mark, I just wanted to also just check, because my other questions have been covered, with that relinquishment fee for euthanasia, there is no perverse outcome here where poor dog owners or something like that might go, this fee's too high, I'm going to keep the dog and continue to mistreat it or something like that, is there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor McCann. I would say absolutely no. Our animal management team are all about the welfare of the animals, and so no. I think what you're saying is the fee going to be so high that someone will then say, don't euthanize the dog, I'll keep the dog, but I'll continue to abuse the dog. I think we just need to trust in our animal management staff to do what's right for the dog. I can't categorically promise you that will never happen, but I know that the team on the ground will be very mindful of. I mean, abused dogs, and James Jefferson might want to step in, but I think there's where there's quite obvious mistreatment or abuse of dogs, I think a different set of criteria come into play.
Cool. Could I just ask then, and I'm happy to support that, can you just check with staff to make sure that they don't have those concerns? Because it would be awful if the perverse outcome.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I will do. Thank you, Councillor McCann.
Martin.
Yeah,
Hold on. Does James Jefferson want to respond to that?
sorry, councillors, I was a bit slow on the sticking my paw up for that. No pun intended. Look, can I give you the reassurance? Absolutely, as Mark has said, the staff are all about the animal welfare. So those costs, so where they can be met either by the dog owner who's relinquishing the dog, and maybe it's a contribution towards holding costs until we rehome that dog. We would never ever allow a dog to go back into an environment where it was going to be harmed. I can put my hand on my heart and know our people are passionate about the welfare of the dogs, and I can give you that reassurance.
Martin.
Yes, I just want to touch on the Three Waters as well. Look, fully support what Rob said, Mark. I think we're heading down the right pathway with that. I do hear what you're saying, Mayor Guru, with regards to a political decision through financial decision, but I just think we have to be strong in that decision. And be prepared to defend our, well, not even defend, just to validate why we're doing a thing. It was just interesting what you said there, Mark, about the debt book and with regards to, are we going to get paid dollar for dollar on the debt book, or is that, that's the $1 million question, well, the $100 million question almost, is it?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. That is the $100 million question. So it's certainly our intention to bring to the table the debt book for the assets plus the total accumulated debt that's attributable to the non-funded depreciation. So we're combining the two, because in reality, that's what it's cost council for our Three Waters assets. But it's the value at this stage. It's the value of the debt book, not the value of the assets.
Yeah, so we've incurred, obviously, we've looked after our assets, we've incurred a bit of debt in the process. We currently are incurring debt as well. I was going to suggest, well, why not start trying to claw back some of the work we're doing? But fundamentally, that increases our debt book in that space, which is maintaining our asset. Is that sort of right?
Yeah, look, that's right. I mean, there's many costs related to those assets that are outside of the debt book. We've rate funded, so we don't fully depreciate our assets, but we do rate fund some of that. So we've incurred some costs there. But also in terms of our treasury management, how we hedge interest rate hikes, we have swaps with those long-standing agreements with the banks. And at this stage, that's out of scope. Central government have said, well, your swap book, we won't entertain that. So, all we can bring to the table is the debt that really, the genuine debt that pertains to those assets. And we have to have those discussions with them in a collegial manner.
Yeah, look, in my view about how government's treating local government around the three waters is it's just so up in the air, it's not funny. We are being mandated at the moment. The clear signal we've heard is it was a decision made quite a long time ago, not recently. So, we are heading down a certain pathway. I think Councillor Coots's views around a plan B or an option on looking or having those discussions about what we are going to do with the three waters is starting to become a little bit of a discussion that needs to be had so that we can respond with regards to what's happening out there, because it just seems to be gone very, very quiet. But the trajectory of where this is all heading seems to be been quite clear right from the beginning, even though from a local government perspective, we were told this was going to be done in partnership, but I'm not really seeing that in the attitude of government towards this whole situation. So I think whatever decisions we make in this space, I think they're fair and reasonable, and we just need to be strong and stay behind those decisions. Thank you.
Ian, did I see you raise your hands?
Yeah, I was just going to comment from a process point of view. The information we're getting from DIA is that there will be a due diligence process conducted through the middle of this year. So they are sort of pulling together resource to do that. But there's going to be a detailed exercise where all of this will have to be worked through, and we'll put our case, and the discussion will flow. But I'm expecting that's going to happen through the middle part of the year in terms of the financial side of things, debt, etc.
Jocelyn.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I had some questions that others have raised, but I have actually three more. So the first one I'll talk about is the this relinquishing fee. Obviously, they're going up quite substantially. Does anyone have any figures on whether this will actually cover the cost of feeding those animals, or whether this is still subsidised?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, and James, apologies if I get this wrong. So the cost increase, again, the cost increase is merging two, but it does include sustenance, which is the cost of feeding the animals.
So these animals that end up in the pound, some of those will be strays and some will be those, well, I don't know, taken off owners who have been maltreating them. Is that correct? I don't actually know.
I'm happy to take that, Mark. Look, a combination. The relinquishing is around the voluntary, where somebody, because we've had enforcement or some sort of compliance action, somebody goes, look, the dog's out of my control. The staff assess it as actually not being warranted, but put down, and can rehome it, and they do that in conjunction with a number of the other agencies. So these are rare circumstances where people are going, I do want the dog to have a better life with someone else. So we do come across those where the dogs are straying and they go back to their owners. We operate that graduated response. If Mark's dog keeps wandering, eventually he's going to get an infringement for it. So these are those rare, and I think it's a really compassionate approach to helping people and of course keeping community safe where the dog isn't getting the proper care and attention it needs. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. So my next question, and unfortunately I can't remember the slide number, but it was talking about responding to growth, and it's been proposed for a 2.8 increase in rates. And I think some of that work was around town centres, and I just, I'm just interested to hear from council staff, because it's my understanding that all that work had been planned for and budgeted for previously. And so why is there suddenly an increase in the rates? And I know that there's other areas involved, but just clarification on that, if I may, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. So, so just to make sure that we get our numbers right. So, $2.9 million is the total of the additional money that sits within that budget increase of 7.7. So 2.9 million equates to 3.7%. Now, most of that cost is actually about getting more resources into the PMO to drive the capital works program into high demand areas. For example, the consenting team, as well as the comms and engagement team, they follow the capital projects, they're following COVID, and just our general consultation on all our strategies and district plans, etc. So a very small part of that is just to put a little bit more money into the review of the town centres, because it's changing as we go. I don't know whether Sean wants to put a comment a bit more, but it's really a small, tiny portion of that $2.9 million. Yes, there's budget for town centres, but this is just a review of what we're doing. So it's a little bit more money just to have a bit of a review. So, but it's not significant. It's not $2.9 million that relates to the review of the town centre plan.
Yeah, I guess that slide might be a little bit difficult to read, because the top line says town centres, but it's actually just below the sum of everything that's below it in terms of the total. And as Mark said, yeah, we're committed to review the priorities for the town centre program of work for the next 5 to 7 years, and there's some funding proposed to do that work, and that's what's sitting in there. So I think it's $150,000 a year maybe, or something in that order, to reprioritise. And this links back to the question that was raised around the Raumati Town Centre upgrade. We're proposing to look at all of those and reprioritise and develop a program for the next 10 years.
Yeah, there's 100,000, Sean, in year 2. Sorry, beg your pardon, next year, 100,000.
Yep.
Okay, so thank you. So the comments that you made, Mark, about a lot of that money was going into the resource consent. So I'm not sure whether there's any slide further down the line that's going to show how much of a extra revenue is going to be gained from that process.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. Look, it's spot on. So look, there's high demand on the consenting team. Obviously, construction is going gangbusters, so the team are having to work a lot harder. But so we need to put more people in the team. We need to look after the team that we've got. We've got, just like the consenting team, are highly specialised, and we're at the mercy of that market as well. They can actually move across to different other consenting authorities that are paying more. So we need to make sure that we can retain our staff. We need to be mindful of the huge pressure and workloads that's on them. But the more consenting we do, we actually do get more revenue. And what's been factored in the 7.7% is more revenue derived from consenting fees.
Okay, so what you're saying is that that's all taken into consideration? Absolutely,
yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. So my last question relates to slide 22. And you might have answered this, but I just want clarification on this. It talked about, I can't remember the exact word, it was something about, I think the word most was used in the first line, and then later on in that slide it talked about removing and replacing I think that 10-week slot with a term slot. So I suppose the first bit of my question is some, and is that the bit that's itemised in the rest of that slide is the only bit that's going to change? And also too, with those changes, the fees are going to change, but are they going to go up dramatically?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I do believe you're talking about one of the fees and charges slide. So
Yes.
the comment about the small aqua classes, which are currently so the fees are going up 2.4%. So just in line with everything else. It's just the team are actually just trying to simplify that charging. So at the moment, you buy you basically the fee is the classes are over a 10-week period. And the intention is the 10-week period aligns with the terms, the school terms. But there are some school terms that are 11 weeks or 9 weeks, as we all know. Some schools go back a little bit later than others, and some, et cetera, et cetera. So it is simply the cost of those classes is going up 2.4%. It is a housekeeping exercise to align it to school term as opposed to a 10-week fixed period, because that is creating confusion amongst the community.
Okay, thank you. So I know that often the Waikanai Swim Club is raised during the annual and long-term plan. So I'm just seeking a surety that there aren't any changes proposed to their fee structure.
No, through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, the only changes to our fees and charges of what's detailed in this slide deck, most of that it's really just housekeeping, and some of the charges that are going a little bit above the 2.4% is because it's rounding to the nearest $5, or it's rounding to make it just sensible. There's no point charging someone $59.35. But there's apart from what we've tabled in this presentation, all our fees and charges are exactly the same.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Right, I'm going to take Gwen, and then after that, we're going to go straight back to Mark to continue the slides. Gwen.
Thank you. Through the chair, just picking up on the growth projections. Obviously, consents are one thing, but I think we're all well aware that there are significant delays in the actual construction industry with getting raw materials and that sort of thing, actually getting builders and that sort of, and all that. So presumably that's going to have a flow-on effect to actual new rating units come online. So are we seeing that start to happen, or what's the sort of story there? How do we account for that? Because I guess consents are one thing, but then the actual translation of that into building stuff is different. And apologies if you can hear my son in the background. He's just decided to go toilet, so I've just got to run away. So give me 30 seconds.
Noise controls on the way.
Mr. Mayor, we'll come back to that question. So should we take another question whilst Councillor Compton is away?
I've got one quick one. In terms of the COVID response, you said you'll, as it happens, then you'll react to it appropriately. You then said that you'll be reprioritizing the budget. You already must have in your mind which are the areas that you will massage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just say yes, we can carry on. Oh, you said no, we can carry on. Good.
Look, it's going to impact council-wide, and the senior leadership team will, we're gearing up to have 25% of staff either sick themselves or at home with dependents. What areas are going to be live, what areas aren't. We need to look at that. But the main point, it's a very good question. No, we don't have a list of things that we're going to stop doing. We'll respond as and when we do. I think we've already put in $137,000 additional money to incentivize businesses and investment. But the reality is, when we need to slow down and stop because we don't have the people on the ground to do it, the senior leadership team will be having those conversations. We'll be bringing it back to the table for your approval of what we don't do.
Okay. Look, do you want to continue with your slides, and then when Gwen turns up, you can.
I think he may be back.
I'm back here now. My youngest boy's still learning about using the toilet properly, so we got through. He's been home sick all day, so we got through this morning and all that fine without anything. But so it had to fail at some point.
Sorry, Councillor Compton, I've just gone blank on your question.
So it was about,
I guess, it's about growth related. Oh, sorry, Gwen.
Yeah, so it was about in terms of the growth projections we have. And
I've got it.
And the flow and effects that we're seeing in terms of it delays in the construction industry in terms of homes getting to code of compliance and that sort of thing. I mean, obviously, as you said, consents are going great, but it takes a while for those to translate through to actual new dwellings.
Yeah. So the numbers that Ian is showing you is the numbers at the rates team work very, very closely with quotable value. So during the year, they actually value basically additions, etc. Building consents to properties, but it comes down to when the certificate of title is issued. So when the certificate of title is issued, it becomes a rating unit. So during the year, the rates team just report back to us how many certificates of title have been issued. So there is a time delay between I'm doing a subdivision, I've subdivided, I've got my 224, and I've got my certificate of title. So the information that we're reporting back to you that we think it's going to be 1.1 is based on certificates of title that have been issued this year so far. And we've got a really good relationship with quotable value, and we're asking them, well, how many have you got that you still haven't processed and that you're still working through? We often get to a position where when we set the rates, because we normally adopt the annual plan before the 30th of June, and we normally set the rates as well. And there's a little delay where we're in that fantastic position where we've often ended up with a few more rating units than what we thought, because quotable value will just process a few more. So should you have comfort on the 1.1%? Yes, you should. That's based on certificates of title that have actually been issued and what we believe from quotable value are in the pipeline to be processed before the end of the financial year.
Very good. Mark, do you want to go back to your slides?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Just looking at the time, I think that's a fabulous idea. Okie dokie. So sorry, you've got me again for a couple of slides. So I'm going to just set some context, very important context. So in December, largely speaking, we brought this presentation to our councillors and the chairs of our community boards, just to show them, just to detail for you where we were in terms of the draft 22-23 budget. At the start of that briefing, we issued packs, and those packs had was a really lovely, glossy 2-page summary of the long-term plan. We always fall in the trap, as we say to you, well, we're just going to be sticking to year 2 of the long-term plan or year 3 of the long-term plan, and rightly so. Sometimes you turn around to us and say, well, what is in year 2? What is in year 3? So we produced those glossy pocket size summary documents of what's in the long-term plan. We also gave you the beautiful published 2020-21 annual report, and we gave you a copy of the presentation that you've largely seen today. What we then took you through that presentation, and at the end we asked for comments and feedback, but we also asked you to go away on the Christmas break and reflect, look through all the documents, reflect what's in the long-term plan, reflect what's in the draft 22-23 budget, and where possible, please provide to Joe or the corporate planning reporting team any thoughts that you may have had on the budgets, what was missing, what we need to add, etc., etc. So some of you have managed to provide us with some reflections, and those reflections are going to be on the slides that follow. So just to stress, some of you haven't, and this workshop is an opportunity for you to do so. Staff have looked at those reflections, and we've got some feedback on some of those reflections. But this is the part of the workshop where we'll take you through what some of your thoughts are. We'll open it to the floor. I know some of you have got additional ideas that we need to consider. because what we need from you is just a steer. It is a public workshop. You can't make decisions, but we need a steer from you as to what additional inputs do you think should be in this annual plan, so that we can go away, work through that, and bring it back to you on the 24th. So this is the first time that all of you will have seen these reflections that we've received so far, and I'll take you through them. Next slide, please. So the first one is relatively easy. It's to do with the Paikakariki surf lifeguards. Now, the issue is that as part of the long-term plan, they actually asked the council for total funding of $750,000 spread across years 1, 2, and 3 of the long-term plan. Our councillors discussed this, debated it, and the decision that was made is that $50,000 would be included in the budget for year 1 and year 2. So $100,000 has already been included in the long-term plan. Paikakariki surf lifeguards want 750. We have included funding of 100,000. So there's a $650,000 gap. So the question is whether or not you want to increase that funding or not. If you do, it's OPEX, it's a grant, and that will have a direct impact on the rates increase for the year. Mr. Mayor, do you want me to pause and have a discussion on each one, or do you want me just to go through the lot, and then when everyone sees what they all are, then we can have a collective discussion about them all?
Well, I suppose each one could be discussed, and then but we're making no decisions, right?
Yeah, that's right. The only thing is we would like a steer is, so for example, if you wanted some more funding to go to Paikakariki surf lifeguards, at the end of this, before we conclude the workshop, staff will need to know that so we can work that into the new numbers.
Could I just make a comment, please, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
I know there's about 5 slides. There are a number of items per slide. If we're going to go through each one of them individually and take questions as we go, I don't expect we'll get through all of them. It would be good to get through them all and then maybe come back and address questions with regard to each one of them. Then at least everyone has an understanding of the extent and the scale of what's proposed across currently.
Yeah, and there's a lot to take in. The breadth of this presentation is actually quite huge. I'm sure elected members will need a bit of time to sort of weigh a number of things. So I'm not sure whether we'll be ready to give you a steer even on some of the more critical ones.
Yeah, I think there has been a number of slides we've gone through, and it is late in the day. So yeah, we might have to look at how we structure the 24th, Mark, in terms of coming back to readdress these next 5 slides, because there is quite a lot in there.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Look, we did anticipate that potentially this could have happened today. So I think we've even got a third workshop up our sleeves. So absolutely, we can accommodate that. Would you like me to continue, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, if you go right through,
maybe
we can have a brief discussion, questions, and then we need another session to actually get our teeth into this.
Yeah, sure. Okay. All right. We'll take that action and bring that back. So, so what I'll try and do is, so what I'm presenting to you is what we've received and some feedback, but I'll try and articulate what the issue is. So the first one is whether or not you want to provide more funding to Paikakariki surf lifeguards. Now, the second one relates to McLean Park, and there's a number of issues there. So the reflections relate to the scooter park, the older person's exercise equipment, and security cameras. So, so what has been requested is for a scooter park to be installed at McLean Park. There has been a request for older person's exercise equipment, particularly along the foreshore at McLean Park, and for security cameras near the basketball courts because of antisocial behaviour. So I think to start is that, so included in the long-term plan is $2.1 million already in the 2021 or the current long-term plan, and that's 700,000 in the current year and 1.4 million next year. And that $2.1 million has been budgeted to for the design and upgrade of the toilet and shower facilities, the improvement of the skate park, provision for upgrades of play spaces, including an older person's area, which is adjacent to the skate park. as we've heard earlier from Mike, in terms of this, the resources that are required to design and build a scooter park in New Zealand are limited. And the Parks and Open Spaces team has been able to procure some resource for the design of the scooter parks in next year. So next slide, please. With regards to the older person's exercise equipment, so the plan for Maclean Park is for an older person's exercise area to be built adjacent to the skate park. Once that is done, then there will be consultation. Consultation will be needed once that is done to ascertain and understand what people want in that exercise area, and that includes exercise equipment. Now, the outcome of that consultation will define whether or not it makes practical sense or there is a need to have exercise equipment installed along the foreshore. So there is a dedicated exercise area for older persons in the plan for Maclean Park. It's happening next year. There will be consultation, and then we'll be able to say with certain whether or not we need equipment on the foreshore area. In terms of security cameras, yes, we know that there's been some antisocial behaviour down on the basketball courts, and the proposal is to have security cameras. Now, this is actually fundamentally, this is a policy decision that the table needs to make. So what we've said previously is that council has a CCTV network, and the current function of that CCTV network is to protect council assets. So it's not monitored, it's not for community safety. Now, when you want to have a security camera for community safety, that needs to be monitored. When you have a CCTV network that needs to be monitored, there's higher costs. So if you wanted to put security cameras for street safety, that's going to incur the cameras themselves are not a big cost to put a camera there. But if you're having it monitored and it's no longer serving the purpose of protecting council assets, but it's providing safety to the community, you're increasing your costs tenfold. So if that's the will of the table, we'll need to bring those costs back. The medium-sized events fund, there was a request to include funding for medium-sized events. And so the feedback that we have on that one is that the long-term plan includes an annual budget of $200,000 a year for major events fund. Now, within that $200,000 fund is $25,000 for feasibility studies for major events. Now, what's been brought to the councillors already is that there will be a planned policy change from next year. That $25,000 for feasibility of major events will be repurposed to help to help facilitate medium-sized events, and to also help grow medium-sized events into major events. So $25,000 of funding has been repurposed to make that happen from next year. Next slide, please. We were asked about a climate change rate, a budget for businesses for climate action, the Otaki pool boiler, the Maclean Park basketball court lighting, older persons exercise equipment, the Raumati Community Board, and the Raumati Village road safety improvements. So responses or feedback from us for your consideration. So Auckland City Council consulted on, or is consulting, I'm sorry, I'm not up to speed with the outcome of that, but they were consulting on a new climate levy rate, which is either going to be a targeted rate or a uniform annual general charge. As you know, you can review your rating system at any time. Typically, we review our rating system every 3 years when we do a new long-term plan. Now, for the last 6 years, the table has tried very, very hard to simplify our rating system. It's still complex. We still have the largest amount of rates across most councils. And if you did decide actually you want to consult on introducing a new rate into the rating system, that does put us in the domain of full consultation. So we cannot simply just introduce a new rate without consultation. If you're introducing a new rate, then you're obviously increasing your rates as well. So it won't be 7.7%, it'll go up by the amount of money that you want to include for that rate. Budget for businesses for climate action. So we haven't actually specifically included, that comment there, not included in the draft 22-23 AP budget. That's not quite correct. So in response to the budget for businesses for climate action, so in the current year, there's $15,000 that has been used to support building capability in matters of sustainability, including climate change. The long-term plan does include budget next year for a sustainability educator to provide carbon footprint education alongside the waste minimisation team. In terms of, so there is money to just support and increase the capability and the awareness and the sustainability of businesses. So that's already included in the budget, and that money is actually being spent now. In terms of the Otaki pool boiler, $700,000 is included in the long-term plan for next year, and that money is intended to go towards installing a heat recovery system that reduces the level of carbon dioxide emissions that are currently coming from that pool. And in terms of the basketball court lighting, so there is going to be an upgrade of the skate park, or a skate park refresh, which will include lighting. And what we're proposing to do is to, if we're going to put lighting in for the upgrade of the skate park, then lighting will be provided for the basketball court, and they'll both be synchronized so that the lights come on for both at the same time and go off at the same time. So there's budget for that already. Next slide, please. So just continuing, as I've already said, in terms of the older person's exercise equipment, there will be a dedicated older person's exercise area, which is planned for McLean Park adjacent to the skate park. Once that's done, we'll consult on what that area will include and whether or not exercise equipment is needed on the foreshore. In terms of the proposed new Raumati Community Board funding, we have included a placeholder.
Sorry to interrupt there, Mark. Janice has just wanted to raise an issue with that placeholder budget for the $100,000 for the community board funding.
I will just hand over to Janice.
Thank you. Sorry, I think there's just a point of clarification that could be attached to this point. So indeed, there is funding provisioned within this draft annual plan budget to fund a Raumati Community Board. Should that get confirmed following the Local Government Commission's determination. The point that I just wanted to clarify is that when we pulled this budget together, it was before the council had adopted its final proposal for representation, and we placed it in as a placeholder for funding initiatives that might respond to the representation review. And I guess the point that I want to clarify is that there were many potential things that we could do in response to what we learnt from our community while we were doing the representation review. There were some conversations around initiatives that might help bring councillors as decision makers closer to their communities. There were conversations around being able to better engage and empower communities at a really local level. And so the point that I want to clarify for you all is that the estimated costs of the Raumati Community Board total about $100,000. So that means that within this annual plan, there is no provision for any other new initiatives that might seem like a good or necessary idea coming out of the representation review, unless they can be factored into existing budgets or work programs. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks, Janice. Through you, Mr. Mayor. And then lastly, in terms of the Raumati Village road safety improvements, sorry, it's not Raumati Village enhancements. It's this particular reflection was to do with the proposed road safety improvements. The long-term plan already includes $1 million for those road safety improvements, however, for the next 3 years. And yes, there's been consultation on what the community wants and what's been proposed. So there is some funding for that, but at the moment, the confirmation of that funding from Waka Kotahi is still pending. So the plan is for $1 million, but we do need to wait confirmation that that funding is available to do that work. Next slide, please. And then the last feedback that we have, reflection that we've had, is a request to consider an additional water rate, a green charge that connects consumers to water, that connects, my apologies, it connects the consumers of water to the health and sustainability of the sources that provide the water. So I am the river and the river is me. So this is addressing a number of things. It's Council's response to the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management. The proposal is that Council uses its demand management strategy, which it does by way of its variable and fixed water charging, to introduce a new rate. And it's about basically protecting and enhancing the sustainability of our water sources. We've had a look at this, and as I've said, if it's a new rate, then instantly the special consultative procedure is triggered. We will have to consult with the community on whether or not they want this. If it's a rate, it means that the rates revenue requirement is going up. And but if we just took a step back and we said, right, well, this is trying to connect, this is really about the health and sustainability of the sources of water, protecting our water supply. We already have a rate in our rating system that's the district-wide general rate, and that funds environmental sustainability. So for you to just consider, and once you've been able to consider that, to provide us with a steer. So, Mr. Mayor, through you, those are the reflections that we have received so far, and I'm positive that there's more around the table.
So are you asking councillors to put their hands up to say what more they want to add?
I think so. I think so, Mr. Mayor. You know, whether or not we do that, we'll take the direction from the table. If councillors prefer to digest this and then email the corporate planning reporting team, and we can bring that back, as I said, up our sleeves. We have a third workshop, so we could just table the reflections, and then all the ones that the rest of the councillors send us, or we just open it to discussion now. Happy to take the direction from everyone.
Can I just add something, Mark, to that? Just the so we did sort of ask that question in advance of Christmas so that we could have an opportunity to pull things together. We certainly, you know, we talked today about resourcing and staff capability and you know, work pressures. We don't have the capacity to reassess and reevaluate a whole new round of proposals to the annual plan as it stands at the moment. That would be extremely difficult for us to push to get that through in the time frame that was presented earlier by Joe. So in that context, and basically the proposals that have come through, the staff feedback is that, you know, a lot of them are already allowed for in some shape or form, or are reliant on other design work happening in advance of that. If there are changes to the rates, then that's a significant piece of work and will require consultation. So just, yeah, just some context around, you know, putting forward a further wish list for us to look at. That it's going to be difficult in the time frame that we've got, but happy to look at some of those. If it's minor that we can do it, then that might be something we could look at. But yeah, it's going to be extremely difficult in the current environment.
So can I just suggest that councillors have been given this, that you give the councillors time to sort of cogitate, if you like, on this, and then get back to staff with the responses, and then we can decide whether we need another workshop to tidy things up in terms of the actual direction you want.
Yeah, that would be good. But you have some questions. Some of those questions might relate to that approach.
So can we go back to the councillors now? Is that the final slide?
There's one more to go.
Oh, sorry.
One more.
Let's do the other one then.
Next slide, please, Fiona. And I think this is Joe.
Thank you, Mark. Through you, Mr. Mayor. This is the same timeline as you've seen before. We could talk to DEM Services about getting another workshop before the 24th, and obviously that agenda would be going through elected member reflections and getting a steer in a bit more detail from you. So yeah, and thank you, Sean, for your comments around timing, and we need, being clear about whether we're informing or consulting on these as well going forward. That was it for me. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Can we go back to the councillors?
So, Your Worship, I have Councillor Coots, Councillor McCann, Councillor Randall, and Councillor Holborough with their hands up.
Can we close the presentation?
Thank you, Guru, and staff for the presentation. Look, my question is just fundamentally about the process today. From my experience, usually your year 2 of a long-term plan, your annual plan, year 2 of your long-term plan, largely remains unchanged unless it's anything new and emerging that you didn't know at the time when you did your long-term plan. We had 741 submissions on quite an extensively consulted long-term plan, and I don't see any of the I haven't got the complete list in front of me, but the things that have raised in these slides from other elected members that have been presented today are not things that have just popped up in the last, 3 to 6 months. And so, personally, I, with the rate sitting at 7.9%, the pressure we already know on the organisation, I think we should really only be considering things like the event one, I think is an example that we could consider in light of COVID and Omicron. But the other things, some of them were actually discussed even through the long-term plan. So, personally, I wouldn't support relitigating stuff or bringing anything new in year 2 that was thought about or could have been introduced and well consulted on in the long-term plan. So I'm not too sure whether other councillors share that thought, but it'd be helpful to know from staff whether that's the usual expectation of year 2 of an LTP.
Janet.
Sorry. Well, I'll wait if you like, but I was just going to respond to Councillor Coots's. That certainly would be my understanding of the usual approach to year 2 of the LTP.
Janet.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that under usual circumstances. The only reason I brought up the Paikakariki Surf Club is that between the long-term plan and now it's had to be demolished. So the situation did change quite fundamentally, and it made their funding situation more urgent. That's the only reason I brought that up. And I've just brought it to the table. That's all I've done, as something that we might want to consider. At the end of the day, that's not my call, though. And in terms of the rest of the suggestions, could I make a suggestion that we take out any suggestions for rates, for additional rates, because that would involve a consultative procedure, which we don't have the capacity for at the moment, and would happen through a rates review. And my other suggestion would be take out everything that's happening already. Older person's play equipment, lights on the basketball court, that kind of thing. Anything that's already in train, just acknowledge that we're already doing it and take it out, and then kind of see what we're left with. And I don't think we'll be left with actually very much. We've already talked about the minor events fund, and that conversation is already happening in terms of us wanting a small dog and not puppies. Some people will know what I mean by that. Because I think that would simplify this situation a whole lot. And I think it would be worthwhile going back to the presentation now and just going through and seeing what's left once we do that. And then we might find that there's not a whole lot left. And the rest of the councillors might decide, okay, I've heard what James has said. This is year 2. I'm just going to leave my, anything that I wanted to add in at the moment, having heard what we have from staff today, I'm going to just park that for now, which would be a sensible way forward. And also as councillors, we were kind of given our chance. We were told if we had anything to take it to the staff over the Christmas break. We've had lots of time to do that. And then today, is the day when they're being, discussed. And that's what was agreed when we did our previous workshop. So I would not support anything further coming now. And I think we should kind of just take a little minute now to see if we can't sort out what's already been brought to the table today. And then we're done and we can kind of move on. And
Rob.
people can still submit into the process.
Rob.
Thank you, Mayor. I just going back to the events, I just wonder whether something may have been lost in translation. It's certainly been raised by a number of councillors, and I've discussed it with councillors following each major events meeting, that it's not about medium-sized events per se, and it's not about growth, it's about community events. So I'm just really reluctant to not take this opportunity to suggest that the direction that the change is heading is not the one that I suggested, and I'm unfortunately missed that one meeting where it may have been discussed. And I have sent out an email trying to clarify to all councillors what I was thinking. So I just want to rectify that, if it is rectifying that, or alternatively, it might be another councillor who's put this forward. Just want to work out how we can move forward in that, with that particular suggestion, and not end up with something that actually I don't think is fit for purpose.
Bernie.
Yeah, thank you. My question is to Mark. Mark, 2 points. One is the climate levy rate and the green charge, right? You're saying if that is to go ahead, we will have to consult on it, right? Can I ask who raised it? Did that come from the community board? Are we allowed to know who raised that? That's the first question. The second question relates to McLean Park. We've already agreed. Councillor Coots, I hope he's not suggesting we take all that existing work off the table. He supported it 100%. And so what you said before, that current work is still ongoing, right? Just confirm that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. Look, just in terms of the climate levy rate and the green charge, I prefer not to tell you who it was. If the individual councillors want to say who they are, that's up to them. The point is that's the feedback that we've had from around the table, and that's what you need to consider. In terms of McLean Park, no one is saying take any money away. There's just been a request, I think, to just obviously get on with what's been planned, with a couple of additional, some security cameras at McLean Park and some lighting for the basketball courts. There is a lot of talk about a scooter park versus a skate park, and it has been floated quite a lot at the Parapara Umu Raumeri Community Board that we need exercise equipment for older persons along the foreshore. So what we're saying is, look, there is a dedicated older persons play area planned for McLean Park. Let's do that. Let's consult on what they want before we actually go and start putting exercise equipment all over the district. So sorry, Councillor, I don't want to tell you who raised the request for the rates. They can themselves if they wish to. And McLean Park, no money's been taken away. The only thing we're saying is that if you want security cameras at McLean Park, then that's a change in policy that you'll need to make.
Thank you. Martin.
Couple of things. I agree with the thing that Rob was talking to with regards to the events fund. I think if we're going to repurpose any money, it'll be repurposed within the budget. Doesn't have to be a different budget. That's what I suggested when we talked through this last time. Yeah, supporting community events, definitely. Look, my approach is a little bit different. I do apologise, Mark, that I didn't send through my reflections. I missed that. Apologies. But as a first-time councillor, when I came through this long-term plan process, it was quite a steep learning curve, and I think some other councillors sort of tested that as well. And I made my views clear to you that I was uncomfortable with the size of the rates increases at the time, and I didn't articulate that very well at the end of the process because it got cut off in the conversation side of things quite quickly. I think we had a good readjust through the district with the last rates increase. Some areas paid quite highly and other areas paid less, but it all evened out because of the new QV valuations that are coming through. At the time, I'm sure I've got it written down in my notes that the CE indicated that the rate increase we're looking for year 2 was going to potentially come down because that there's lots of reasons for that. But I want to see more of a contraction of the rates increase. Not talking to specifically how we achieve that, but I think in the economic environment that we're in, I appreciate the pressures that we're under, but the average person out there as well is also under huge pressures as well. And I think a 25% rate increase in general over a 3-year period is a huge ask in regards to our community. So I'd like to see a contraction of our rate increase further than what it currently is. That's about what I want to add into that equation. I don't have a figure. I would have a figure, but it would more than likely be an unrealistic one. And I appreciate the pressures that council's under as well. That's it for me with regards to my view on this. Thank you.
Sophie.
Yeah, kia ora. Bernie, I'm happy to say that I raised the idea of a climate rate. Happy to let you know of that. And yeah, as Mark has mentioned, it's a similar thing to what the Mayor of Auckland is proposing through, yeah, Janet thought so, through their annual plan as well. But obviously there's never a good time to raise rates, especially not in this COVID kind of context that we're in right now. And Martin's eloquently mentioned that. But I think in terms of consulting, I don't necessarily feel like we should kind of shy away from just putting these ideas out there to see what the community thinks, because, you know, this could be quite a good time to do that, you know, considering people will have their heads in the game, you know, thinking about their role in civic participation with the elections this year and the like, and people, you know, and even in us kind of thinking about other ways that we engage our communities too, learning how to engage in a COVID world. I think it's a good opportunity actually for us to put these ideas out to our community. And I don't think, yeah, I just kind of feel like I don't think we should shy away from that. And obviously it's important that COVID is front of mind, and we've seen some provision for that through these draft budgets. And I also just think though that we've got kind of issues that will not be going away in this COVID context, one of those being climate change and the impacts of climate change and our responsibility to mitigate them. And I think, yeah, anything that we can do to signal that the climate emergency is top of mind, that there's a lot more that we can be doing in that space through greater provision for walking and cycling, increasing budgets in that area, through just, you know, pushing forward our work to be carbon neutral by 2025, ensuring that we hit that target and don't have to keep pushing it out, and also feeding into the work in the growth space as well. Also connecting in with the idea for a green charge. I think that's definitely something that I'm keen to also see what the community thinks. I just kind of don't feel like we should be shying away from consulting, and if that's the reason why we're not going to think really seriously about some of these things that we've got in front of us, then yeah, I would just encourage us to be open to hearing what our community thinks.
Gwen.
Yeah, so just really in support of what Councillor Hanford said there. Sophie and I talked about this back in December when Auckland first announced it. And I think one of the key things from what Auckland announced is this was about having dedicated funding, not just to tackle climate change, but also to unlock funding from central government to help tackle climate change. And I guess unlike Auckland, we're not a provider of public transport, so we don't have that sort of investment profile to do. But a lot of what Auckland Council was doing is investing in upgrading their walking and cycling shared pathways with their targeted climate rate. And they're looking at doing things like ensuring there's more urban tree cover, which has obviously benefits from the urban heat effect that we're increasingly experiencing. I mean, if you've gone outside today, you would have noticed it. So like Councillor Hanford said, I don't see consultation as some sort of barrier. I think we should go out and ask people about it. Phil Goff said back in December when he announced this, he said, we must be able to say to future generations that we used every tool in the toolbox to tackle the climate crisis. This council last triennium announced a climate emergency. Are you really going to be able to say you've used every tool in your toolbox to tackle the climate crisis if you don't go out and ask your community about this. You know, this was a new idea that came out of Auckland Council in December, so it's not something that came up within the timeframe of when we were developing the long-term plan. We're talking earlier today about the need for local government to be agile and be able to adapt to new things as they come along. Here's a new thing. I think we should go out and talk to our community about it and get a sounding from them about what they think about it. You know, we've had just in the last 2 months, we've had several days of record rainfall, which is clearly linked to the climate crisis. We've got, you know, that all the models show there will be increased amounts of precipitation and increased extreme weather events. There's another one forecast for tomorrow night. Yeah, I couldn't sit here and look at our community with a straight face and say that we've done everything we could do if we didn't go out and consult on getting a specific funding stream for accelerating our climate response in this council.
Right. Okay. I suppose it's my turn now to put my hand up and say the green charge idea is mine. And to justify that is actually, there's a one-page rationale that comes with it that was sent to the staff. What you've seen there is a couple of paragraphs or more. I agree with Councillor Pranav, Sophie and Gwyn, that the consultation process can be a channel to discuss issues. If you decouple that from the actual rating exercise, the green charge doesn't have to come this year. The idea of the green charge could be discussed now for input into the long-term plan, because I think that's the big catchment or the hub where these big ideas need to be discussed. So I'm quite keen to have the ideas out there, both the climate change funding and this green charge has ideas to feed into the long-term plan. And the earlier you signal this, the better you will have in terms of how the feedback is going to come back. I would urge you not to just chuck it out. I will give you the the one-page rationale, and you can see for yourself. And that's the decision I ask you all to make the next workshop or even earlier. We can have a discussion about that. So that removes the rating issue from the current annual plan process, but use the annual plan process to discuss key ideas.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Sean.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. So with regard to the climate change issue, there is a briefing next Tuesday where we will be presenting to you some specific, actually, so rather than a general fund that's been discussed, we have gone out and done that work to look at how we might achieve that carbon neutrality. And there are a whole lot of, whether that's sequestering or purchasing credits or a whole lot of other options to present back to you with costs associated with them, that would actually give you some sort of tangible actions associated with delivering on that neutrality. And there may be things in there that you want to add to the annual plan that would not trigger consultation, but would actually also achieve what you're looking at in terms of emissions reduction. So that briefing's on Tuesday. The other issue is the environmental levy or the green levy. If you want us to get a sense for what the community think about that, we don't necessarily have to go through the annual plan consultation process to do that. We could do a separate exercise to look at that and see what the community think about that approach.
I'm keen as long as the ideas are put forward to the community to consider.
Well, maybe a targeted piece of consultation on that might be a better way or an easier way to do it, and put some funding up for that rather than using the...
No, as long as the outcomes can be achieved, I'm keen to just get the idea out.
Yeah. So rather than using the annual plan process, which was open for everything there, we would look at doing a piece of work next year with some funding allowed for it to do some consultation on that particular proposal. Those are just two pieces of information that that you might want to consider as part of your deliberations.
Cool. I can live with that. Who hasn't spoken? Jocelyn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Very interesting conversation over the last 10 minutes or so. and one of the questions that I would like to ask about that, and then a follow up is, so obviously going out to consulting on the annual plan, what actually would the cost of that be? Just for interest.
Oh, I'm just actually, thanks for you, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually just responding to Councillor McCann's. Look, in terms of the cost, if you were, look, in terms of consulting, there's a lot more work that's required because the document in itself has to be written in a different way. You have to present the options. You have to show, well, if the options were in, what's the rates increase, or the options are out. So there's a lot more time taken to draft the document. So that'll be, you know, just basically more writer time. Probably be a bigger document, so a little bit more design time. I can't give you a figure. I can't say it's going to cost $10,000 more, but if you were, depending on what you're consulting on, you know, you need to think about, well, what is the likely level of submissions and response from the community? If it's 741, so if you're proposing to go out and put increased rates and put in 2 new charges on people on top of Greater Wellington Regional Council's 13% rates increase, you know, you're likely going to get a lot of people pushing, or no, commenting. So we are down on resource, and we saw for the long-term plan, the most efficient way of doing it is to outsource the analysis and the collation of those submissions. So we haven't budgeted for that. If we get 741 submissions, you have to go through the hearings. We then need to bring back to the table which way you want to go. And then, of course, the wrap-up includes actually writing to the submitters. Now, sometimes we do that in 2 ways. Some submitters write pages and pages and pages, and we actually do go back to them individually, but we also then prepare another document which basically outlines, broadly speaking, this is the responses that we've had from the community, these are the decisions that the council has made. Now that's another document that needs to be written up, it needs to be peer reviewed, and it comes at a cost. So the cost of consultation is far more than the cost of informing the community, because you have submissions and you have to deal with that.
So thank you, Mark, for that. Now I'd like to actually ask Sean, you made the comment that, you know, that you wouldn't necessarily have to go through an annual process or a long-term plan process, but you could actually do it a different way. And I suppose, so there's consultation, but then the funding side of it, how, you know, what you're sort of thinking about. Could you provide a bit more background to that, please, or a bit more information?
So what I guess what I was suggesting is that, as I said, if you want to do more in that climate area, you'll get a list of potential projects next Tuesday that you could incorporate into the annual plan with some funding estimates there associated with them, and that would give you some specifics in terms of what you would achieve as well and how much that would cost, and that wouldn't necessarily trigger the need for consultation on the annual plan. The other one that relates to the water rate or the environmental levy, you could put some funding up as an operational project to look at that proposal, and that would incorporate an element of consultation as part of that. So you might look at whether that, and that's something we could possibly go by and look at, that might be $50,000 to $100,000 worth of OPEX to look at a specific project that is focused on the Mayor's proposal. And we probably need to have a look in more detail at that one pager and structure something up around that.
Okay, thanks for that.
Sorry, that is new work. That is new work on top of what we're already resourced to do. So we'd have to consider that. But that's certainly something I think we could look at. And as Mark said, seeing the strain that the organisation's under and the work pressure just to get the slides together for this presentation today, to then have to, not saying, again, in terms of consultation, just the work effort to get that out and then to deal and respond with submissions would be significant on the organisation.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I think, obviously we've got a briefing coming up on Tuesday. So I think once we see that information, it will give, councillors a good idea about what their feelings are on how we manage this. So that's good. So I have another well, I actually raised my hand in the first instance. So in relation to providing feedback, I wanted to raise the matter of the Waikanae Beach Hall, and this is something that has been, I think the Waikanae Community Board has raised this a number of times, and it's not necessarily, I suppose there's two parts to this. One is actually including more money for improving the state of it, but also it's actually repackaging that money so it can make a much better difference rather than spending 30k each year, spending a very small amount of money over a long period of time. And I'm not sure, Mark, if you remember, directly after that annual plan meeting we had, whenever it was, that I actually had quite a detailed conversation with you about this. And I obviously didn't follow it up with an email, but I definitely did raise this matter here. And even at our community board meeting that we had last week, it was also raised there as well. So it's about not actually necessarily putting any more money towards it. I've been trying to look for the actual line item to see how much money is available. It's about repackaging it to make better use of that money. And I know that there are conversations around, I suppose that building as well. But yeah, so that's something that, as I said, that has been raised previously in long-term and annual plans, and was raised directly after that meeting, was raised at our community board meeting on last Tuesday. Any comments, please?
Sorry, was that a question, Councillor there? Well, I mean, more than happy to talk to Mike and those, to talk to Mike directly offline as to whether or not you think there's a better way that we could deliver on some outcomes for the hall.
Yeah. So I suppose, I was a bit disappointed to see that hadn't been raised. It wasn't listed today, when it had actually been raised. It has been raised a number of times since that annual plan meeting briefing we had in December or so. And so I would be really keen, and I think there's support from the community board to have that added there, to relook at how the money that's been allocated to it is spent, and maybe yes, and maybe that is like. Fortunately, I can't find the line item to see how much money has been allocated, but whether or not that's actually sufficient.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor. Look, it certainly wasn't left off the list intentionally. As Sean has said, we can just have a look at that. I think what you're advocating for is to look at the funding for the hall and see whether or not it can be repackaged. It wasn't deliberately left off the list. Christmas seems like a lifetime ago. So
yes, I know. I appreciate that.
A lot's happened since then. So we can take that action.
Thank you.
Right. Can I go to Janet, Gwyn, and then Kathy, and then we go back to the list and do what Janet suggested. We start knocking off those ones. Janet.
Sorry, I'll just wait for that then, Guru. That's all good.
Wait for what? Oh, okay. Gwyn. Disappeared. Kathy. Kathy, you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon. Kia ora me Guru. And thank you, Mark, for all the work put into this. I just really wanted to affirm Councillor Randall and around McLean Park, saying all of those items are in the long-term plan. And just with the older person's equipment, the community board, along with our two councillors, are quite capable of doing the engagement with our communities ourselves, which would save a consultation fee to ratepayers. And also with the security camera policy, I would just hope and pray that the councillors will make that as one of the priorities, please, as the safety of our young people is paramount. And there's been an issue or a couple of issues over there, the Christmas period, where some young fella or somebody else was trying to take a skateboard off some young child. So that's all I meant to say. But thank you, Mark, because it was really interesting. And I've been sitting here all afternoon.
Martin.
very quickly. I just wanted to bring up, it's nothing to do actually with our council, 18% increase from the regional council, another 12 or 13% this year, which we will wear in the neck because everyone doesn't believe the regional council exists on our rates bill. But are we going to, do we push back against that? Or I mean, how do we get that publicised? Because I'd like them to sort of be in front and centre with regards to answering why that's such a large increase.
They call it a diversion strategy, is it?
Yeah. Let's swing it back at them.
So I think there was a question there. So through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, year in, year out, typically Greater Wellington Regional Council will consult. And when they do consult, we advocate on behalf of the community. We provide a submission that we bring to the table. We have actually been to talk to some of our submissions. It is a pain point for all of us. And the rates team end up fielding hundreds of calls as to why the rates increases have gone up so much. So this happens year on year on year. What you said is absolutely right. The community doesn't differentiate between us and Greater Wellington Regional Council. The tools that we do have is we obviously do talk to Greater Wellington Regional Council. We prepare a submission, and if need be, we go and talk to it. That's the best that we can do. We advocate on behalf of the community to bring those rates increases down.
So we need to make that a very voice from the community perspective as well.
Right. Look, can we go back to the list?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Mayor. Fiona, if you could please load the presentation and go to, it's the last 5 slides. And that's it. That's it. So
Mark, if you follow Janet's discussion, that all those ones which have been covered by staff rationale in terms of is already there.
Sure.
Matter of timing.
Sure, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'll try my best. So in terms of what's been requested of me, so in terms of item number 1, the Paikakiki Surf Lifeguards, we have included funding already in the long-term plan. Not the requested amount, but some.
Janet, this is your baby. Do you want to say anything about that one?
Yeah. As I said before, the situation has changed since the long-term plan, which makes this different from some of the other ones. What I would quite like to know is how much can we add to that figure without triggering a consultation procedure? Because I'm really keen for us to keep this process simple based on what we know about the pressures on our organisation now, not even taking into consideration what might happen over the next couple of months with COVID. So even though, as you say, this is my baby, I'd really like, I really want support for this, and I really think it's an important project. But right now, I'm aware of the constraints on the organisation. So I'd just like to know how much can we do for them without triggering consultation, and that could be brought back to the next briefing, maybe.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can answer that. And this would be OPEX funding. So the cap to trigger consultation is $5.3 million. So we've already signalled an increase of $2.9 million. So you've got roughly speaking $2 million or $2.4 million of additional costs that you can go up without triggering the significance engagement. However, as we've learned from Joe that you have to look at all the criteria. You have to look at the financial criteria, and you also have to look at would suddenly putting $650,000 into the Paikakiki Surf Lifeguards, would that generate widespread community interest? So I would suggest that potentially that would. So from a pure, to answer your question financially, you've got about $2.4 million of additional costs that you can throw into the budget without triggering the significance engagement policy. But it's not just a financial, you have to consider the criteria as a set. And I think that would be widespread community interest on funding the new lifeguard tower.
Yeah. So what I'd also be interested in before we discount, or before we decide on this one, is to find out from them what would be a useful amount, because what they can really do with at this point is, and which a lot of projects, kind of gain a lot from, is a serious commitment on our behalf to then encourage other funders. And quite often other funders will shy away unless the organisation has that commitment. So I'd quite like to find out what would be a kind of basic amount which would help them with that process. So I just, a little bit more work to do on this one, maybe, but others have their hands up.
Right. Do we want to push this to the next, given that you want additional information?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I can answer that question because I was privy to a letter from them, a pretty strong letter, and $650,000 is what they want.
Yeah, so that's the ideal, but what would be go back and say what would be a minimal useful amount, and also look at what other councils have done to help fundraising efforts for life-saving clubs. I'm happy to do some of that work myself.
Yeah, but you got to be very quick in terms of the process that you've got to go through to give staff the direction.
Yeah.
So is anybody else happy with just leaving that for the moment? Not happy with it? Okay, so that seems, what's the next one, Mark?
Okay, moving forward, so we'll work through McLean Park. So in fact, everything that's been asked for here, it's the only thing that is not already planned to be done is provide a security camera above the basketball court. Everything else is already provided in the long-term plan. So we can go to the next slide. And so, yeah, so it's just the security camera, as we've heard from Kathy.
And we don't have a exact figure how much the cost will be.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, look, I think putting a camera in is relatively inexpensive, but it wouldn't be monitored, and that would be against the point. I think you want it monitored. We do have some of our CCTV network, the police can actually get direct access to, so they can extract footage from. It's just whether or not the table wants it to be monitored 24/7, which is I don't think you will, but I think the request has come from a point of antisocial behaviour, and so the security camera should be being monitored so that someone can alert authorities if there's antisocial behaviour, and none of our cameras have that level of monitoring at the moment.
So what you're saying is we could put a camera there, subject to police retrospectively looking at.
Yes, I think so, Mr. Mayor. We could put a camera in relatively expensively, but it wouldn't be monitored.
I think that should do it.
Well, no, sorry. I thought we were talking about the lack of a policy to actually sit overarching on that in terms of the camera itself. So we're not supporting putting the camera in because we don't have that policy in place, and we're not proposing to do it. The cost of the camera is relatively minor. That's the issue. So we're saying we don't support it.
Right. So we've got policy problems, lack of policy problem with that. So that's not something that cannot be sorted out further down the line, can it?
Potentially, but again, it's not in the program at the moment. And
so anybody says that we need this, wanting to die in the ditch to have it, have the camera there and monitor,
Mr. Mayor, just drawing your attention to the fact there's a couple of people with their virtual and physical hands up. Councillor Buswell has her virtual and real hand, and James Jefferson also had his hand up. And I've got Councillor Coots and Councillor Halliday.
Can we have James Jefferson first?
Sorry, I'm just trying to unmute myself. Thanks. Look, I want to tautoko what Sean was saying and just share my experience of putting cameras in different parts of the North Island. It is a policy piece of work that we'd need to consult on, because you're starting to infringe on Bill of Rights issues. It's not a small piece of work, and there is the question of monitoring and sharing that information with police for them to be effective, rather than so they can be a proactive tool. And my experience in Tauranga City was that the cost is significant. We were lucky to be able to secure some funding from ACC and one of the major developers. But yeah, look, Sean's absolutely right. It's not a piece of work we can do, I think, on the hoof, and you would have other areas. I know Councillor Coots has talked to me about crime prevention cameras and Otaki, Waikanae. You would have a level of service discussion around the district. So I think it's one that we need to do a bit more work on, and I suspect there's not a particular gap in the policy work program for some time. Thank you.
Right. So on that very clear advice, is anybody here wanting to speak on this matter, still insisting that we have cameras and monitor it?
Yeah. I would like to speak, please.
Angela, because I
Thank
can't
you.
see who's putting the hands up.
From my understanding, it's a simple fix to put a security camera in there to monitor property. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if there was an incident around that property, police have access to that information. As a business owner, something's happened outside my shop, and I know that police have access to CCTV cameras. So I don't understand what the difference is. We're not, if we just say that it is for securing our property rather than for the safety of people, then there is no policy changes and there's no policy considerations. If there are criminal offences happening, the police will be able to look at our CCTV cameras for sure.
Mr. Jefferson.
Am I right in saying that or not?
Mr. Jefferson.
Yeah, look, thanks. And I understand your comments, Councillor Buswell. The difference is you're a private property owner protecting your private property. We're a public entity, and we have, I would argue, some extra legal requirements on us around privacy and those issues. And I'm sharing my experience from other councils. And that public realm is just a different beast than protecting your own shop front or that.
So anybody else?
I think that's just ridiculous.
Right, look, we need to get a resolution on this one, a direction to give to the staff. Do we drop it or keep those part of the conversation going into the future? I don't know. But for the annual plan process, I suggest that we drop it, given the advice. Anybody not agreeable? Is that the direction we need to give staff?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I just make a comment?
Yes.
There's been a number of chat messages put up around the inability to see who's got their hand up, and I'm conscious that we've gone over 5 o'clock. It's like 10 past 5 now. Do you see, I mean, we can certainly come back and amend these slides and just group them into those two areas that Councillor Holbrook talked about, and spend a short amount of time at the next session going through this.
Yeah, but I can tell you that I'm quite willing to drop the green charge and skin the cat another way.
Right.
What about Sophie? Sophie, you there? Sophie there? Oh, good.
Yeah, sorry, I'm here. I was just waiting to be unmuted. I would still like to keep the climate action targeted rate in there for further conversation and for councillors to have a little bit more time to think about, and kind of before the next workshop, I'm happy to send around, Gwen and I can send around some more information just for councillors to continue reflecting on whether they want to take it forward, whether that's through this annual plan or similar to what Guru's mentioned into the long-term plan. But I'm not willing to drop it just yet.
Yes, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm willing to engage with the councillors, skinning the cat different way, right? So with
Your
that,
Worship, we've got three people with their hands up. We've got Councillor Halliday, Councillor Coots and Councillor Pravanov.
right, can I have Councillor Coots, Councillor Halliday, then Councillor Pravanov?
Guru, look, I have to say that I'm not happy with how this process is rolling out in terms of considering these, and no disrespect to the suggestions that have been put forward, but you're asking councillors to provide support, yes or no, to different topics. We've got no way to do that. There's been no suggestion of using the voting buttons to vote them up or down. We're muted. We've got people waving on the screen, hands going up and getting missed. One of these suggestions has an implication because it's OPEX of nearly 1% increase in rates. And I just don't think that's responsible for us as elected members. I appreciate we're doing our best via Zoom, but there are better ways to manage this even via Zoom. And so I've been sitting here frustratingly watching us roll through these item by item, and we're not, not just me, but other elected members are not having the opportunity, whether it be to have a say or to say yay or nay to it. So, and you can see that from the comments in the chat. That's just a general comment. I appreciate we're sitting at 12:05, but that's partly due to the way that we've rolled this this last part of this session. So whether we continue on from here or whether we defer and bring it in another way. I mean, I had what I thought was potentially some constructive suggestions over the Paikakariki Surf Club, but again, didn't get an opportunity to say it, and it's been moved on to the next one. So I'll leave you with that. Yeah, look, I don't think we're doing this as good as we can.
I think Sean has already suggested that we roll it up, and then they'll come back with a shorter version of what they're going to present for the next round.
Well, maybe it's more around what Councillor Coots has mentioned, and looking at how we reframe this, bring back these slides to the next one at the start based on the feedback we've received from everyone today, and to do that.
But some of us haven't been able to give feedback, Sean. That's the thing. It's, and even whether, I mean, I didn't give support yay or nay to the surf club. I didn't have the opportunity to. I was muted. We weren't using the reactions in terms of either a vote or a cross or a thumbs up or whatever. No disrespect to you, Guru, but you just said that's in, we move on. And I'm not sure that everyone supported that being in.
Well, I don't think the Paikakariki one was on or not, simply that some extra work was supposed to be done to come back with some information. That's all it was.
But even on others, you're asking if they're in or out. So look, I'll leave it at that. That's my thoughts. I'm not saying I also wouldn't support the surf club one, but I think for starters, no one asked what the rates impact would be if we left it in. So I can tell you now, it won't be small.
Right, Sean.
Well, my suggestion wasn't that we proceed on the basis that any one of these is in or out at the moment, but that we bring them all back to the next session and work through them in a more structured way based on if we have had feedback. But if you haven't been able to provide feedback, then you'd provide it at that next opportunity on the 24th.
We're going to have another workshop in between, aren't we?
Well, that has been suggested. I think there's a few people that can't make that workshop. We'd need to go away and have a look. I mean, if the purpose of that workshop is just to go through these 5 slides, I would have thought hopefully we could do that in a more efficient way in an hour or so on the 24th, if not less.
It couldn't be done earlier at any stage.
Well, like I said, we can go away and look at that, but I did see in the chat some people weren't available, so we'd need to go away and see
I think we should look for an opportunity before then.
Right.
and we can sort that out. I mean, I take the point, this is a clumsy process. But in the meantime, you know, if there are issues that people want to drop, like I said, I'm willing to drop mine, but keep the conversation going, but without making any impact on the rates. That's what I'm suggesting on my one. Yeah, that's where it stands. So look, can we have a specific time earlier before the 24th to have a look at an opportunity for that? In the meantime, the elected members are quite open to having a conversation amongst ourselves as what was raised, what our feelings are. That doesn't have to stop. I mean, I certainly will be putting out my ideas on the green charge, and Sophie's done the same. And I'm expecting a bit more information from Councillor Pravanov, from Janet Holbrook on the Pakakriki Surf Club. But we don't have to wait for that until the next session that we have. So can I leave that with staff to work out a time and keep the conversation going amongst the councillors in the meantime?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Right.
So, Your Worship, we still have Councillor Halliday had his hand up, but it's now gone. So I'm unclear whether he still has a question, and Councillor Pravanov still has her hand up.
Yeah, Councillor Halliday. You there? Martin?
I've just unmuted then. Look, I'm easy. I was going to, again, like James, I was going to talk to the surf club down at Pakakriki, just a conversation around a capex spend and bridging finance to get some thoughts around that. But I'm happy to back off on that one. I can ask Mike that directly via an email.
Yeah, and have a conversation with Janet, because she's going to come back with some information. Jonathan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to make comments about several of the items that have been discussed today, but obviously it's getting late, so I'm not going to make those comments. But I actually agree with what James Coots is saying, is that I think, you know, we've had a long day. We probably need to, you know, to look at this a different way and work through it differently as well.
In the meantime, the overheads are available, so that's good.
Okay. So I think, would it be useful for us to make our comments, you know, our thoughts, you know, in writing beforehand, or leave until whenever this is next presented?
Well, I said, you know, the conversation among the councillors should continue. I mean, those who are putting forward ideas, if they want to see what they want to do.
But Mr. Mayor, can I just make a point, just a comment? If the councillors are all going to email myself, Joe, and Ian with their views, that's not going to be helpful, because you know, we're just going to end up with everyone's view. So by all means, continue the conversation amongst yourselves. We will look to have another session. We will present the reflection slide. We'll package it the way we've been asked to do it, whether it's in or not, and then look at how we can use the voting buttons and take you through it. But for us to end up with all your separate views and try and report that back to you, it's better that you all hear that round the table at the next session.
True. So all I'm saying is we have the conversation going amongst ourselves.
Lovely. Yeah.
And then we'll be in a better position to engage.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I endorse that. I'm really actually responding to Councillor Pravanov. No, please don't email staff your independent view, your individual views on the items. We'll collect that at the workshop.
Okay, no, good suggestion, Mark. Thank you. Good way forward.
Anybody else has got a comment to make at the end? Otherwise, thank you very much for the session, and thank you to the staff for this highly engaged exercise.
Thanks, everyone. I know it was a tough session. Thank you for your participation. You've got through a lot and you've done very well today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.